Just talked to Ed, and he's telling me that we're not talking enough about the students based on what you're saying on Twitter, so we need to do that right now, and specifically issues about housing and poverty and parents working 3 jobs. So let's dive in. Let me do the introductions first. First I have with us here, welcome back to the show, Kira Hudson Banks, St. Louis University professor who deals with race and class and all of these kinds of issues we're going to talk about. Tracy Turner Bunbury, Francis Howell parent of a Francis Howell graduate.
Yes, sir.
Welcome back to the show as well. Dr. Alex Cuenca, welcome back to the show. You're a SLU man as well who trains educators. Right. And Nadia Brown also back to the show. This is a total reunion table. Although Nadia has switched her affiliation from one local university to the very highly esteemed Purdue University, Political Science and African American Studies. Yeah. Okay, so what aren't we talking about that we should be, that we're hearing about on Twitter? What's been left out of this conversation so far? Where do you, what are the impacts that you see happening in this whole thing?
Well, I think it's important to think about one of the tweets mentioned, the effect it can have when you're in a place where you're not wanted and feeling like you're not wanted and being treated in that way. And so from the mental health perspective, students who are being taken out of their community, we need to think about the impact that it'll have on their racial identity, how they think about themselves, how they make sense of themselves. Are they a liability? Are they not wanted? And that can impact the way that they see themselves and their academic achievement.
And what does it mean for moving from an all black and brown neighborhood that is seen as not valued or not worthy to having to be bussed into a community that doesn't look like you and that doesn't have the same kind of culture or connections to your race, ethnicity that you do. So I think students deserve to have a quality education, right, in their own community that reaffirms who they are, what they look like, and their own value system.
It's hard not to stand out when you arrive to school differently. Is that what you're saying?
Right.
And from a mental health profession, I'm a mental health counselor in St. Charles, and I think about all the time how important connection is. How important it is to be able to truly connect with someone on a deep level, especially at those formative years. And I think about how much harder that's going to be because so many social connections are made after school. After school activities, different after school events. And that might be hard for some of these kids to actually be able to do that if there's any kind of transportation issues. So it's just things to think about, are we really taking care of our kids as best as we can?
And I think from a societal point of view, why did we let these districts fail? Why did we as a society, why did we as a region let these districts fail? In education, we have one of the most backward policies where we take resources from schools as punishment instead of giving them more resources. If we have high crime in an area, politicians are standing up and saying that we need to give these police departments more and more resources. With education, and public education in particular, we take resources away. We're leaving these districts, and so we have to think about not only the students that are transferring into these districts, but also the students that we're leaving behind in these other districts.
This is not a motivating factor to try radical new things. These threats of these cuts are not going to motivate people to make better education?
Well, I actually think if we think about the excellence that, for example, Normandy's talking about, this environment of excellence and the innovation they're doing around STEM, I mean, they were doing that, right? And so did the threat motivate them to do that? No, they were trying to do that even before then. So now they're going to be making these innovations with less funds, having to pay out funds.
Or especially tying student achievement or to the school district itself, right? Correct. So individual students are learning towards the test or learning for a particular, for something that doesn't necessarily lead into life skills as opposed to thinking holistically about student education. So having these kind of conversations, like you said earlier, like devoid of race, devoid of talking about poverty or mental health, talking about gender, really misses a huge component. And also, right, thinking about student achievement as an individual achievement as opposed to a community achievement, or thinking again, right, about systematic. So what causes our culture to devalue certain bodies, certain school places, certain communities, and take resources away that is systemic around race, systemic around poverty, and people that we don't value. So it's larger, right, than just the individual child.
But then in the meantime, we have students who are probably on Twitter right now thinking, what does this conversation have to do with me at this moment? You know, so I think all of these things are so important, but there's so many separate issues as well. So I think that's why with me being in the St. Charles community, I realize how much of a role we have. If we can't change this, what do we need to do at this moment to help children feel as welcome as possible? Because I do think there's a lot of kids who may be on Twitter right now thinking, what are you guys talking about? I just want to know if I'm going to be okay if I go out to Francis Howell.
Well, I think one of the things we need to do is to talk about it, to name it, not to act like everything's going to be fine. You're coming to a land of milk and honey, right? Don't talk about problems you have. Right? I think we have to be willing to name it, because there might be kids saying, oh, well, I'm going to be open. I don't have any problems. But when it comes down to it, you know, are we judging people or teasing people? How are we treating people? Are we open?
And these are difficult conversations to have, right?
For
They're really
adults.
for adults. And they're exhaustive conversations, but as a community, as a nation, we have not gotten around to having this conversation because we're all just so tired from thinking about this, right? So that having really heart-to-heart, truthful conversations around what does it mean for Black and brown students to now enter into this space? What does it mean to have students who might have different learning styles or different cultural backgrounds, right? To really address this and embrace it. So calling out by saying we're different is not say that someone is racist. This does not say that someone, right, has some inherently bias, but it's saying that I'm open to talk about these things.
And I might have questions.
And that's fine.
I was at an event, and there was an African-American woman who had her hair up in braids, and it was pulled up, and a white woman was behind me, and she was like, why is she hitting herself on the head? Why is she hitting herself on the head? And you know, she was talking out loud. And I said, if you're African-American and you have your hair up in braids, or if you have weave, you can't quite get to the itch. So if you had a mosquito bite, you might tap it, right? And she was like, thank you so much for sharing with me, right? But had she not, she wasn't really asking me, she was talking out loud, right? But those sorts of conversations, there are going to be things you're going to encounter that you're not familiar with.
It reminds me of the cast. I'm sorry, let's go to skip Tracy the last word because well, I just want to know, what do you think, how all we're talking about, you brought it up, what's different for the kids? What are the action items, if you will, for the kids who are going to be actually living this out?
You mean both kids on both sides of the river?
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think it's absolutely something new. You know, I don't think any of the kids have experienced this before. I do have to say, having been a former school district professional for quite a few years, I have quite a few friends who are teachers and administrators in the Francis Howell School District, and they are ready to listen and do whatever they can to support any of the kids who are coming. But dialogue, I think dialogue's the big part of it.